Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Rich Woman Rising podcast. I'm your host, Eloise Tompkins, and I'm a money confidence coach and psychologist. And I love helping women to heal their relationship with money using body based techniques. And today, I am excited to bring on a really cool guest who to be honest, never thought that I would have on this show because not this particular person in general, but just the type of person on this show. I'll explain why in just a moment. But today I have Dr. Erin Bowe. Surname rhymes with cow. I had to really think hard about that. Who is a clinical psychologist, and she actually is not just a clinical psych, she's an author, she's a business coach, and she helps health providers to overcome their self-doubt so that they can confidently share their expertise and emerge as thought leaders in their field. Now, you might be thinking, why did I not want this incredible human on my show? And she's laughing. And that's a really good question because as psychologists, we can be, as a profession, really rigid in our thinking and what we do as psychologists. And even the fact that I do money mindset coaching, a lot of psychologists look at that and go, oh, what is she doing? Then there are other psychologists that go, wow, I wish I could do what she's doing, and I wish that I could be as free as her. And so when I came across Erin and we met and we got started chatting about how we're thought disruptors in the field of psychology. And I learned more about how she views money, her relationship with wealth, and also being a disruptor in a profession that's very rigid at times. I just had to share her story. And I know you are going to love hearing about some of the incredible money blocks that Erin has had and how she's overcome them on her own journey. So, Erin, thank you so much. And I am really glad to have you on the show. I just want to make that very clear. So
I
excited.
love it. I love it. I love being introduced as a disruptor. I'm like, oh, gives me like all the I want to sit up a bit taller in my chair. I love it.
Well, tell us a little bit about you and your journey because you've studied psychology and you not only have that history of now kind of helping people with thought leadership and leaning into their expertise, you've also come from the birth trauma, perinatal space. You're a mum to tiny humans, dogs, chickens, you have got a lot of experience. Can you walk us through who you are?
Yeah. So I started thinking I wanted to be a journalist, and I wanted to be a journalist for Rolling Stone. That was the thing I was going to do. That or a florist. I met a lot of psychologists who that was their
Me too.
alternate. What is with that? What is that? Is this totally a thing? So those were my two things I thought I might do. And then the more I dug into it and the more I read other people's interviews, I thought, there's a lot of big egos in that space. And I thought if I'm going to sit with big egos, I'd probably prefer to have a little bit more, I don't know, stay in the room. So I thought, oh, okay, maybe I'll do psychology because that was the thing that people kept saying you should do that. So I did that. And I mean, it took a decade plus that it took to study. I went to private practice. That's what people told me to do. They told me that's where the money was. So that's kind of where I started. I know, right? Hey, it's a cash cow. You make so much money. Total lies. I did that. It's mostly all I've ever done. And then I suppose after having a small stroke at 20, I think I was 27 when I had a small stroke. We've talked about this, migraines, then a tiny little TIA, it's called. I just couldn't work the 9 clients a day that I used to do. And I was no longer like filled with a sense of like pride and self-worth from seeing 9 clients a day either. So I started looking into like, well, what else could I do? And so then, books, courses, anything else I could do that was sort of like making more of an impact became more interesting. And so on my journey doing all the things that I've done, that's now kind of what I help people with, who are kind of sitting in a consulting room going, I'm doing good work, it's amazing, but nobody sees it. Or it's not having the big global impact that you want to make. So that's kind of what I do now.
I love that pivot moment. And I think for a lot of people, we have a lot of those moments in our lives. I certainly know I've had quite a few of my own. And the choices that we then make from that can really change the direction of the path that we take. And it's interesting because as I heard you speaking, the thing that came into my mind, and I see this with so many women, is my worth was coming from my ability to provide care for 9 clients a day.
Yeah.
Now, just for context for our listeners out there who are not psychologists, which I'm guessing are the majority, that is a lot of work, a lot of clients. You're not sitting in a room with someone listening. There is so much more that's going on. You're reading their body language, you're reading and listening to what they're saying and also what they're not saying. You're experiencing that nervous system energetic exchange between your client. You're reading that nervous system energetic exchange with that client. You are sitting with really big emotions, 9 hours a day. That's a lot to be sitting.
It is. And at that time, I still saw kids as well. So that was like pivoting between a 4-year-old, then a 40-year-old, then a 14-year-old, then back to 34-year-old. And it was just like, I don't know. I don't actually know how I did it. I think I don't know. It was a lot. You're right.
You're a high achiever, right? And I think, again, a lot of women will identify with being a high achiever. I know I certainly do. And as a psychologist in the field of psychology, I guess I'm curious, like, what have you noticed with, I guess, money blocks as a profession, and then how that has shifted for you as an individual?
I think when I started, it was about like just see as many people as you possibly can, because it was very much a transaction around you need a body in a room, you need a bum on the seat, and then you get the
Make
money.
money. Yeah.
Yep. And that's kind of it. So I think I started to see that I would get praise if I could add more people to my day. So that very, whatever childhood part of me that wanted to cling to that at the time, like I wasn't someone who went into psychology as like a star student. I actually found it really hard until I kind of probably got to the pointy end with masters, when then I was good at it. But like the statistics, all the stuff that came before that, I was not that great at that. It was a struggle. Like I was that nerd who was studying on the weekend instead of going out, because I'm like, I just want to pass. Like, so it was that probably core sense of like, I don't belong here. I'm not supposed to be here. One day someone is going to find out what a massive dickhead I actually am, and I'm going to get booted out. So I think I leaned into that part that went, oh, you can prove your worth here. So I proved my worth in my capacity to hold other people's energy. And that continued probably throughout my career, where I particularly, like if I look at my PhD thesis or my master's or even my honours, I chose really difficult topics. I've always chosen really difficult topics because I felt like, oh, I have to just, do that bit harder, work that bit harder. So yes, it definitely was a thing that, again, I would say it wasn't about the money. It was about the what can I do to feel like I actually belong here?
Yeah. And I so relate to that. And again, I am wondering how listeners are kind of hearing that, in the sense of, do I belong? How do I belong? If I do X, then Y will happen. And there's that real if then kind of mindset that can be really highly attached to that sense of worth. And it's interesting that you say it's not about the money, because it's also that sense of, but if I work and get more bums on seats, then I get more money. And I'm kind of curious about that, because you've spoken about how you've had such diverse experiences in the field of psychology and how this has impacted your relationship with money. And I guess I'm curious how you've gone from it's not about the money to then kind of opening your eyes up to, oh, actually, maybe I have some money blocks.
I think if you look at, like, I don't know, this kind of, again, there's these peak moments, and it wasn't a peak moment I realized was a peak moment until someone pointed it out to me this year, actually. When I finished my studies, as in as much as you can, and you haven't actually graduated, but like you're in that sort of in-between space where you can kind of work, but you haven't quite finished. I moved interstate and I couldn't get a job. And I reckon it was probably maybe 8 months. Like I've kind of almost, I want to say I've blocked it out. It was months and months and months of sitting at my desk, applying for job after job after job after job after job. And I just couldn't get one. And
Mm.
so I think it landed in me as like, well, clearly there's something wrong with me, right? Apart from the
Mm.
fact that, like, at that time, I think it had been a few years. So the private practice thing with Medicare came in, what, 2006? This was about 2011. So by that time, it was very oversaturated. And I moved to Melbourne, which at the time was the most oversaturated place with private practices at the time, which I
Mm.
didn't really pay that much attention to. As an older, wiser person in my 40s now, I go, okay, of course. It was harder to get a job because every woman, man, monkey, and their dog was opening a private
Mm.
practice. And that's all my experience was. So it took me a long time to get a job. And when I finally did get one, it was in, that children's story about in the dark, dark wood, in the dark, dark forest. It's a
I
dark, dark
loved that
house.
book growing up. I love that was my favorite book.
It's so cool, right? It's like, oh, how do you do the anti? So the place I ended up working was in a dark, dark shopping centre in the basement of a shopping centre. So it was a converted car park. It was never meant to be, it was never meant to have shops in it. They'd converted it. So then there was a dark, dark corridor with a dark, dark fluorescent lit pharmacy. And then you go through a fire door in the pharmacy, and behind that was a methadone clinic. And so I worked sort of just outside of the methadone clinic with like no windows, concrete floors with green, I think it was green, like methadone stains all over the floor, used condoms, syringes. The toilet doors were not on the doors. So again, if you wanted to go to the toilet, you kind of had to like come out through all of that maze, go and get a key, get a PIN number. Like it was just a whole thing. So it was all about, I think, just going, well, this is obviously all I am worth, right? It was actually one of my probably psychopathic clients who pointed out to me, it's like, what are you doing here? Like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? I'm like, well, I work here, whatever. It's like, there's probably more for you than this, and you know it. I was like, oh, you bastard. Like, so sneaky, so like cunning, but also so on the money, right? So yeah, it took one of my own clients to point out to me that, like, yeah, could probably do more than this. And it wasn't about the surroundings. It was about going, okay, this is it for me. This is all I can attract. This is all I can do. So yeah, so from that, and then a year after that, I ended up at a very nice beachside practice, which was probably the highest charging place at the time. And that was, similar sort of stuff, but like just different packaging. So I suppose that's what I'm getting at. It's like, okay, whatever the packaging is, if you go into a place thinking like, oh, I don't really deserve to be here, I'm not really sure I'm, supposed to be here, that's exactly what you will bring to your experience. So yes, from working in the dark, dark methadone clinic through to this beautiful location, but like angry people throwing black AMAXs at me and like being very entitled. Same stuff, just different packaging.
That's fascinating. And like I am fixated on the book because I'm like, I loved that book. When my teacher would read it and they'd get that big book out of the dark, dark woods, I would be right at the front, just like, bring it on, love it.
Yeah.
So that really resonates for me. And I always wonder though, what does that say about me as a person, like loving that book? But it was, anyway,
It's a
not
good
about
one.
the book.
It's a good one.
And it's fascinating because I really got a visual of like the dark corridors and walking down this manky environment that would have been really tough, and working with people who probably didn't have a lot of money, who probably were not able to pay for your services themselves and were relying on whether it was like government funding or some other kind of funding, like not for profit or something along those lines, right?
Mm.
And having your experience of kind of being in that situation of working with these really vulnerable people, and I'm assuming not being paid particularly well in that, in yeah, because we as psychologists, it's like, oh, it's all about the impact. It's all about the impact that you make. Yeah, it's about the impact, but we have to survive as well, right? And then kind of shifting that, it almost sounds to me like that 180 of, okay, well, I left that environment and then I moved into this environment that was light and white and airy and really stunning. And it sounds like you were getting paid a lot more in that clinic, in the upmarket clinic. And
Yeah, not dramatically more, I would say, but it was more just the what would you say? I suppose it was an illusion. A lot of it was an illusion.
gotcha. And so there's that illusion of like working in this manky place. There's this illusion of like working and yet underneath all of that, still not being paid adequately.
Mm. Or just having things like, I think I told this story to you before, where we had a bonus system. So
Mm,
if you earned, an extra like $30,000 for the business a month, let's say, I'm just plucking that number out of the air, but it was probably something like that because there were a bunch of us working there. You were supposed to get a bonus. And then the first time I ever was supposed to get the bonus, my pay came through, it was off. And I was like, oh, this isn't right. And they said, oh, yes, someone complained about you, another psychologist, of course. They're like, we decided not to pay you this bonus. So it was another one of those like, oh, you're not good enough. Let's punish you
mm.
by taking money away, like a kind of angry parental figure going like, well, you can't have your pocket money because you haven't done this. So yeah, I think that's why I say it doesn't matter about the packaging or the money. I think it's the conviction. If you don't have the conviction in knowing who yourself, like who you are, what you're about, not even like I hate it when people say like charge your worth, but just like what you need to charge in order to do what you want to do to get the freedom or the life or whatever it is that you want, it will always keep coming back. Even if you choose a nicer place to work, or even if you choose somewhere that's got like a bigger salary, if you don't ultimately go in there thinking, yes, I belong here, I have the conviction to be here, it'll just follow you.
Do you see that in the people that you work with in terms of their business and in terms of their relationship with money and how they then choose to structure their business in terms of how they then to choose to price their services and all of those kinds of things?
I think so, because ultimately, like if you're doing one-on-one work, there is an upper limit unless you're going to choose to keep upping your prices and see less people. Like there's only so far that model can go, which is why
Mm.
it's interesting. Like when I used to work, with younger psychs coming through to the business, and they're like, oh, what do I charge? What do I charge? This person's charging this, this person's charging that. Well, it's not about that. It's actually about like, what are your expenses? What are all the like projected sick days that your dog's going to have to go to the vet, or the power's out, or something's happened,
Mm.
like that's what you base it on. And then it's like, well, what's your training, what's your time, what's like, you just got to actually look at it from a really non-emotional point of view. But unfortunately, people, I think in our industry, I don't know what your experience has been like in healthcare, do tend to choose these really emotionally loaded models, frameworks. They're not even a model or a framework, but they choose things based on how it feels,
Mm-hmm. It's not
which
just
is,
psychology.
yeah.
Very much in psychology. And I think we have our own belief systems that we put on top of that. And that influences why we do it. And yeah, it's the same across the board with women. It doesn't matter what industry we're in, if we haven't worked on our money blocks, whether it's the worthiness block, whether it's the struggle block, whatever it is, we then go into it holding those beliefs, and that emotion then drives our decisions.
Mm.
And yeah, and that's why I asked, because I was curious whether you see it as well, because I certainly do. And when we can detach from that emotion, then that's when we're actually able to make some really empowered choices. And that
Mm-hmm.
leaves me wondering how you, and I know you kind of spoke of this before, like at that moment that you had the stroke and you realized that you were unable to do those 9 clients a day and
Mm.
had to change your model. I'm curious how that then got you, because now you have a really successful business where you're doing some incredible things. And to do that requires working through those money blocks. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is how did you go from that pivot point to where you are now?
Mm. I think if I think about it, there's always been some good people in the background. And one of them was a boss I used to have who used to always say, don't you dare undercut me. don't start and then like charge less than me because you think you need to, because that's how it starts, right? One person starts charging less than the next and you think you have to be the cheapest. So I think ultimately I just went like, well, you've just got to try it on. And, you know, thousands of people did not like run away going with torches and I don't know, whatever you imagine people are going to do. It's like, yeah, some people have been like, okay, no, can't do that. That's okay. But I think for me, it's also like, well, I've been doing this 15 years now. I know that I have done years of unpaid work. And I know that it's years because I did 2 years of unpaid placements. I never got paid for doing placements back in the olden days. I used to
Still
do
happening now.
heaps of bulk billing where people just didn't turn up, you know, no bum on the seat, don't get paid. So I think I've just learnt it's okay at a certain point, whatever point you want to choose to go, I don't want to see I don't even see 9 people a week now. So it's like, you got to work backwards from that. If you want and sometimes it's not about the money, it's about the freedom. You know, if you want the freedom in your day to go, do you know what? I'd rather spend that time writing a book. I'd rather spend that time pottering in my garden. Then you've got to work backwards and go, okay, so what do I need to charge in order to be able to do that? And it actually is that simple, but you've got to give yourself the experience of doing it so that your nervous system goes, oh, actually, that is okay. That's safe to do that. It's fine. There's no pitchforks and torches and people coming after you saying that you're like a, you know, stuck up bitch or whatever it is you imagine like people are going to do when you put your prices up. You just put it there, take a breath, you lean back, physically lean back, and people can come to the party or not come to the party. That's okay.
How did you stretch your nervous system to have that start to feel safe for you?
I guess when I think about it, I honestly think some of it was just like just getting in and doing it, really, and being like, well, do you know what? Like, I suppose sometimes I give myself this pep talk, and I'd give this pep talk to clients as well. It's like, I don't think old white men on the golf course, like, are standing around going like, oh, we really got to be more affordable. You know, people are really struggling. What can I do? It's on my heart to help people. Like, I don't see it.
That's totally what I would envision, you know, men standing on the golf course wondering, hey, yeah, I have to be more affordable. Yeah. No.
Yeah, my heart space doesn't feel good. So that's where I go when I start to get a bit of a like, oh, I think about old white men on the golf course
I love that.
who don't put their hand on their heart and go, oh, how do we be more affordable? How do we help humankind? It just is, right?
Look, I tell you what, if women did think more like those old white men, I mean, in a way, it'd be a good thing, but in a way, like, let's not take on everything because that would be detrimental. And it is true, though, being able to reframe some of those thoughts. And I think what you're saying is you started to notice and become aware of how these patterns were actually impacting you in a way that was no longer helping you, in a way that sounds like burning you out, in a way that was sounding like it was unsustainable. And it also sounds like within that, your body was kind of saying, nah, this is too much. This is, and I think our bodies do send us signals and they say, hey,
Yeah.
you're doing too much right now. And we don't listen. We go, I'm just going to shove you down because my heart space says that I need to just keep giving. That's the kind of person that I am. I'm a giver. And if I don't give, then all of those negative, you know, pitchforks and torches come out, right? That worst case scenario. And what I'm hearing you say is at some point we need to listen to what our body is saying, because and usually it happens, like you've said, at that point of fuck, something's happened and I really cannot keep going this way because I'm seeing the impact that it has on my body. Like it's really difficult because I don't want women to get to that point. I don't want women to get to the point where their body has reached that point of, for lack of a better word, like breaking down, not a mental breakdown, but like a physical burnout or a significant illness has kind of popped up because we haven't been taught how to listen to our body earlier.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, it just continued. So when I was pregnant with both of my girls, they had hyperemesis gravidarum, which is like morning sickness on steroids. So I was vomiting 20 times a day. Mike, there's no way. I just couldn't work. Like, I used to drug myself up on a Friday, go in for like maybe 4 hours of work, and then the meds would wear off and I'd like manage not to throw up on the train and then just come home and puke and puke and puke. So like,
Mm.
there is a way that I think you either just go to it and you burn out and you have to come back from that, or there will be signs along the way that's like, okay, you can't keep doing this. And so, yeah, it's definitely been a thing for me that when things have started to get a bit like, all right, can you keep doing more? No, you can't. For me, not me anyway. Some people probably got a nervous system where they can just turn it all off and depersonalize and go and do the thing. But not me, not for me. And I think I had to learn to be like, well, just because that's what you maybe see some other women doing or think they need to do doesn't mean that needs to be the way it is for me. It's very similar to the entrepreneurial space. Like, I just don't have that high energy. I can't go without sleep. I can't force myself into an energy type that I don't have.
I don't think that's particularly healthy though, anyway, but
Yeah.
having high energy and not sleeping, I don't think that's healthy. So if that is you, maybe that we need to check that as well, because I hear you, like, and I think that's kind of what I hear you speaking about there is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses. And it sounds like your dominant responses are more of that shutdown mode and kind of withdraw, pull back, slow down. And I'm definitely with you on that. That's kind of my go-to response. Whereas others do kind of move into that more fight flight state, which is that more energized, or not energized, I won't say energized, but more active, more will go and push themselves to breaking point just to get stuff done. And but both of those are kind of outside of our optimal level of like functioning essentially. And so that's why I guess I was saying it's neither of them is healthy. We need to find that kind of optimal zone, which is hard because often we don't know what to look for in that zone. We're so used to waiting until we're kind of at that point where we're like, far out, I'm so tired, I can't get off the couch and I just want to doom scroll on Instagram, or at that point where we're just snapping at with a new client, for example, because we are just so overwhelmed, but we're not recognizing it. And then we think, oh, okay, now I need to do something about it. Well, hang on a minute. You're recognizing yourself when you're at a 7 or an 8, but what about when you're at a 6 or a 5 or a 4 or even a 2? Like, how do you know what you need to do in those moments to help stop things escalating to that point of burnout? So, like, there's so much in that. And I don't know, is that something that you found for yourself?
Yeah, I think once you look for it, like you look for that, like I don't know, it's almost like it's a state of check in with yourself, of sort of going like, all right, am I in the room or am I sort of just a shell in the room reacting to things? So, I mean, I think for me, I've always kind of just done all those little check-ins of like, okay, walk. Like for me, I think like, okay, walk through a door. Just think like, what am I noticing? Are my shoulders up around here? Am I breathing slowly? Am I like, what else am I doing? That's my like little tells that actually I'm actually really tense, or even just the like looking at your hands and going like, oh, am I clenching my hands? Like tiny little simple things that tell your nervous system whether it's safe and whether it's okay to be relaxed, or whether you're giving it signals that actually you're about to go into battle, which is easy to do if you don't catch yourself looking for them.
And if you don't know what to look for either,
Absolutely.
like if you don't know what to look for, I remember when I was studying psychology back in the day, and I was running groups in a hospital, which I loved. It was so much fun. And one of the things that I learned was progressive muscle relaxation, which is where you intentionally go through each muscle group in your body. And you can go as short or as long as you like with this. And I was running a half-hour session where I'd take clients through clenching and releasing each part of their body. And I would kind of do it along with them as I was going through, so I wouldn't forget what muscle group I was up to. And I realized that it was one of the most helpful things for me, for my own body, and being able to check in with myself, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that my jaw was tight until I did that. And when you clench it and then release it, you can go, oh, actually, now I know what it feels like to clench and then relax. And you get that sense of what your body feels like, because most of us don't know what it feels like to be relaxed because we're not in that state.
Mm,
Don't notice it. So I love
mm,
those little check-ins as well that you do around going through the door or touching a doorknob and just being like, okay, I'm taking a mindful breath right now.
mm.
Or I'm walking through the door and I'm just noticing my feet on the ground, the weight of my feet, and I'm connected to the earth. Like they can be
Yeah.
really powerful techniques to kind of just simple,
Mm,
but powerful.
yeah. Yeah.
How did doing that kind of help your relationship with money and allow you to build a business?
I think, as I said to you before, so like I think a thing that I recommend for people to try, or not try, don't try. If you're worried about that, like, oh, putting up your prices and having that conversation, it really just is like, again, looking at your physiology. So like if it's on a call, it's you drop the price, you wait, lean back, let the other person take the invitation instead of doing what a lot of us do, is because if there's charge behind it, we like say it and then rush to like say something afterwards and lean in and like try and make it or whatever. So that's been a really useful thing for me to actually just like, if you've got like charge around money and saying prices, of just take it really, really slow. Drop the price, physically lean back, take a breath, let the other person, just wait for the other person. It's amazing what a difference it makes.
And I think we're really lucky as psychologists because sitting with silence is something that I am so comfortable with these days.
Mm.
And I love a bit of good silence, and gosh, it makes people uncomfortable. And I forget that. But I
Yeah.
forget that it makes people uncomfortable, right? Like I completely forget that because, and I don't do it intentionally. It's just because I'm so comfortable with the silence. I don't
Yeah.
feel the need to like sit there and fill it. Or sometimes I do, but rarely. And I'm just thinking for the listeners out there who might be thinking, Erin, that sounds great for you. I'm not going to be able to do that because that sounds fucking terrifying.
Mm.
And that sounds way too much for me. Like, who are you kidding? Um, and I say that because like that would have been me like 10 years ago. I
Yeah.
totally get it.
Same. Yeah.
But I love that though, of kind of leaning in and having that kind of physical reaction and noticing it and just noticing before you go in, because I think sometimes we want to go into a situation and we try and rationalize our way. I'm going to go into this conversation, I'm going to lower my price, and then they're going to say, and we have all of this dialogue about their response, what they're going to do, and
Mm.
how they're going to respond. Hence that pitchforks and torches coming out and chasing us down the street and saying,
Yeah.
ah, worst case scenarios. And what I hear from you is kind of like, well, try it. Test
Mm.
that out. You've got to almost like a hypothesis, right? You
Mm.
have an idea, you have a belief that's kind of ping-ponging around in your head, and you're saying to yourself, okay, this belief is true. This
Mm.
is true, and it's true because I feel anxious. I feel anxious sitting there and talking about my prices and saying that this is my price. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I feel that knot in my stomach. I feel the constriction in my throat. I have this thought that they're going to say no. So,
Mm.
all of those things that are going on mean that it must be true.
Mm.
And what I hear you say, Erin, is that, well, let's test that assumption out.
Yeah.
And let's test it out by sitting in the chair. And maybe we're not going to double our prices. If that feels like too terrifying, okay, start small. Maybe raise it by $200, or I'm throwing a number out there. Whatever
Mm.
feels, it might be $50, it might be 10.
Mm.
Whatever feels okay and manageable for you to do. And then test that experiment out. And yes, you are going to feel uncomfortable. If you're not feeling uncomfortable, you haven't pushed the number high enough.
Mm.
But if you push it to that point of where it feels uncomfortable and you lean in, tell that price, and then can sit back and not say anything, and you are feeling uncomfortable and allow yourself to sit in it, you've hit that sweet spot, which is going to stretch your nervous system to, over time, be able to reach that point where you're able to raise your rates without even thinking about it. And you might be
Mm.
listening to this thinking, oh my God, how is that even going to happen? It
Mm.
doesn't happen overnight. Nervous system,
Mm.
did you find that with you? Nervous system work is a bit of a journey.
Yeah, it takes a bit of time, but I think I always remember, I don't know why I remember it, probably because it just is one of those like, oh, really stories. I remember Sarah Jessica Parker, who she said one day something about like if you come from a background of no money and scarcity, she said something like it doesn't matter how much more money she has, she always worries that she's not going to have more.
Mm.
So to some extent, I kind of hang on that as a bit of a like, well, yeah, ultimately, if you don't do the nervous system work to have your body feel safe with money, that money is even neutral, like, let alone positive, but
Mm.
neutral, it will just kind of keep sending you the same signals over and over and over and over and over, I think. And it wouldn't matter if you doubled your prices, tripled your prices, if you don't have that conviction in what you do and it being like it's a transaction at the end of the day. You give a service, you get a fee, it's just transactional, and you can't take the emotion out of it. And it still just feels too trapped in old stories. And some of these stories, it's like they're not even yours, they're other people's. So that's something I've had to kind of work through as well. It's going like, oh, when I feel funny about this, I'm like, is that even mine? Or is that like great grandmothers of witch burning past? Probably. Right, so asking that question, whose is this? Is this mine? Do I want this, or do I want to put it to the side? Like I think it is the intergenerational trauma in the stories, and it's a real thing. It's a real
Oh,
thing.
it's in your DNA. I have a
Yeah.
class that I run, and in that masterclass, I speak about that, how researchers have done research on rats and mice, because that's what psychology does. It's really gross.
I
Beside the point, like what they've learned is that the rat parents, were exposed to a smell, and they were conditioned to fear that smell, and then they bred rat babies. I don't know what they're called.
know.
Rat babies is the name that I'm going with. And those rat babies who had never learnt to fear that smell were exposed to that smell, and it was shown that they also feared that smell. And they weren't around
Mm,
their parents at this point, so their parents didn't like model it to them either.
mm,
And then when they did brain scans on the rats, they discovered that actually there were like literal changes in the brain. And I'm like, oh, that's wild. So you're so
mm,
spot on that generational money trauma passes on. What I want to also understand, just on the whole psychology thing, is because I think this is really important. And I was actually just talking to someone like this week about this exact same concept. How do you shift beliefs in your industry? Or how do you be that person that does things differently in an industry that's always done things the same way?
mm. It means being the outlier. And ultimately, it's like in psychology, we get rid of outliers because they muck up our data. I think you've either got to just put your line in the sand and be like, no, I want to be the person who studies the outliers. They're usually more interesting. The story I tell with that all the time is about growing up in the northwest coast of Tasmania. Poppy fields like would be full at this time of year. So Tasmania grows most of the opium for medicinal use in the world. So they're beautiful white flowers, but like very heavily guarded, electric fences, cameras, the whole lot. And driving past, I'd always look for the red one because there'll always be one little red one that's not supposed to be there, poking its head up, doing its thing. And I'm like, yeah, be a red poppy. Otherwise,
I
nothing changes.
I didn't even know that poppies were white. I thought they were red.
Yeah.
How fascinating.
There you go. Fun fact for the day. We were talking about
And
flowers at the start. I've brought it all back
yeah,
around
right, I know,
to
full
forestry
circle.
somehow.
I love that. And that's so fascinating, like look for the red and embrace your unique. And you know what? I think I really struggled with that from a young age. I was one of those kids that was always different, always on the outside. I always thought differently. I always wanted to know why. I remember being in this workplace, and not as a kid. I've sorry, skipped a couple of
Child
decades.
labour laws. Yep. Skipped over that.
Skipped over a few decades. But when I was working at this job, I would want to know why. I would want to understand. Like my manager would ask me to do something, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, what's going on? She's like, stop asking why. Just fucking do it. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm sorry. I
Mm,
didn't mean to be annoying. I'm just genuinely curious, like what's going on in the team. Like, oh, what project are we working on? Why do you want it blue and not pink or whatever? Like it was genuine curiosity. And people hated that curiosity. And I didn't realize that that was different for a long, well, I mean, I guess I did, but I didn't. And I used to hate that. And I used to just kind of like you want to belong. I
mm,
wanted to fit in. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to be loved and accepted. And I thought the only way that I would get that is by being normal.
mm,
And yeah, yeah, right. And now it's kind of like the opposite. I'm like, you know what? I'm okay being that red poppy because
mm,
being that red poppy means that one, I get to look over all of the other white poppies and help them find their color as well. And they might not want to be a red poppy. They might want to be a yellow poppy. They might want to be
mm,
blue. They might want to be a rainbow poppy. And that's okay. I
yeah,
want to help them. And same with you, right? But we need those disruptors to be able to step into that space and be like, it's okay to be you. You don't need to be the same kind of bland as everyone else because
mm,
you're not bland. You're just conditioned to think that bland is the only way of operating in this world. And let's shake that
yeah,
up.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
love that so much. And I guess I'm curious, like, I don't know. There's so many more. I just have thoughts like rumbling through my head. I have so many thoughts, so many thoughts. And my ADHD brain is just like, I want to talk about them all. But probably wouldn't have listeners enjoying me just talking randomly. Maybe they would. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I should do like no, I'm joking. I was going to say like a 20-hour podcast. I'm like, ugh, no. Joking. Don't worry. That's not coming. But what I do want to say is thank you so much for sharing your journey with us because I think a lot of people are going to resonate really a lot with that self-worth piece of it doesn't matter where you work. You've got to, that packaging is you and how
Mm,
you feel about yourself. And that really landed for me. And I really think there's so much wisdom that you've shared. And what I also want to offer is, how can people reach out to you if they're kind of thinking, oh, I'd like to learn more about you? Where can they find you?
I'm back on the gram. It took a couple of years, year and a half, 2 years, two and a half years. Dr. Erin Bowe, that's me.
And
That's
I
it.
will pop that info in the show notes for you as well. And I know that you have some really cool stuff as well. I think you do some tapping videos as well, like EFT tapping,
Mm,
to help shift some of those emotions, which, yeah, I was talking to someone about the other day as well.
mm.
But that's a whole separate thing. So go follow Erin on Facebook. She's got some amazing, on Instagram, sorry, amazing stuff. And thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
And I'll see everyone else again next week for another episode of the Rich Woman Rising podcast.